David, what is fierce empathy?
It's a great question. We're going to start right out the gate. Fierce empathy is my superpower, but it is one of those things that I have discovered through a lot of pain. Cynthia, I've discovered through a lot of difficulty, immense challenges. And it's not something that I say is just mine. It's something that I'm trying to give as a gift to the world. I'm trying to help people understand that this understanding of empathy in particular has been perverted and skewed, and it's misunderstood, especially among men. Is that when I was 15 years old, I first took a personality assessment at the end. My top strength was empathy. And I'll tell you, as a 15-year-old boy, that's not the top strength that you want to have.
That's like embarrassing. Yeah.
You want to have like, competition or maximizer or something like that. And so for me, like this term fierce empathy, I'll get into a definition here. It came out of me having to really, really do a lot of internal work, a lot of understanding of how God has created me, my natural wiring, my natural tendencies, and then also looking at the things that were unhealthy programs, things that I'd been running based on my conditioning. And so the simplest working definition that I have right now, Cynthia, for fierce empathy is creating environments where people feel seen, heard, and understood. They feel loved and they feel known. But simultaneously, you have the courage to speak the hard truth in love, regardless of the outcome. Meaning that if you've established relationship with someone and there's real depth in what I call like an emotional bank account, you've made deposits and withdrawals and built an actual relationship with this person. We live in a day and age where everyone's walking on eggshells. Everyone's scared to speak the truth. Everyone's scared to stand for what is right and noble and good. And I think especially in social media land, the problem I see is that there's no context, there's no nuance, and there's no deep emotional connection. But when you can have a face-to-face relationship with someone, if you truly love them, you do need to create an environment where, yes, they feel seen, heard, especially when guys are dealing with shame and guilt and all these problems that I know that you and your team navigate and helping guys overcome. It's so vitally important. For me, it's the model of Jesus. It's the model of who Jesus is that he created a safe environment. But man, oh man, he spoke the truth, and it was hard and it was uncomfortable. And sometimes it felt brutal, but that's kind of the summation of it, of what fierce empathy is.
Because that's the part that's missing, right? Like, I think we wisely have warmed up to the idea of empathy in the last 10, 20 years, especially on the more masculine side of things, because it was necessary. It was a huge gap. But, we've had a guy named Larry Hagner on the podcast a couple times. Mm-hmm. He has a term he's really passionate about called tactical empathy, which he might have stolen that from Chris Voss.
Chris Voss, right? Never split the difference.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter who came up with what, but you know what I mean? Like, I think we're trying to find ways to be like, okay, yeah, empathy's good, but then let's make sure we actually do this properly, because I think if we just focus on the front part of it, like you said, being seen, heard, understood, or being known, we actually end up missing out on really what's 50% of the equation, which is being able to use those elements to convey the truth so that you can better someone. And the truth is not always corrective. It's not always harsh, but it could be that, or not harsh, but corrective, and giving feedback, giving something kind of constructive. And I think that part's missing a lot. What gives people the boldness, or how do you embolden people to not just move in empathy, but specifically like this fierce empathy?
Better questions. So I subscribe to the belief that the quality of our life is determined by the quality of the questions that we ask. And so that it pertains to interpersonal relationships. It pertains to business. It pertains to our health. It pertains to our relationship with money. Like, if you are dealing with problems or issues in your life, it's not that you're asking the wrong questions. It's just there's most oftentimes better questions that can be asked. And if we're not aware of what questions to ask, it oftentimes causes us to live in cycles and patterns and programs that frustrate us, right? So an example of this is that when I first got married, my wife and I have been married for a decade. And so 10 years will teach you a couple of things. I definitely would not say I'm a marriage expert, but I've learned a few things along the way. We've got 3 kids. We've got 1 on the way. Life's busy, man. Like, it's crazy. I'm running 2 different segments of a business. I've got a team. I've got people I'm responsible for. I've got clients all over the world. And it's a lot. And so when you get into the intimate relationships in our lives, which is really where men struggle the most, is the intimate relationships. The mistake that I had been making, and why questions are so important, is that my wife would bring me problems, which for any man who's married, like if you understand, like your wife is going to want to talk about things and bring you problems and talk about her day and stuff like that. There's the pillow talk, if you will, right? And a man's kind of our default conditioning, if you will, is solution, solution, solution. Fix the problem. You've outlined a problem. Let me fix it. Let me help you fix it, right? Guys do this a lot in relationships too, just with other men, is that we default to think that when a man's talking about something, he's looking for an answer. He's looking for a response. He's looking for someone to help him fix it. And so what I learned was that that is an incredibly dangerous ground, because what many of us need an environment where we can just process, because we don't realize that 99 times out of 100, we already have the answer. Most people already have the answer to the problems that they're facing. And I found that with my wife, is that a lot of times my wife, she'd come to me and immediately I wanted to jump into Mr. Fix-It mode. And then she would be frustrated and walk away. And I was like, this is all you have to do. Just go do this or go do that or change this and the problem's fixed. She wasn't looking for that in that moment. And so what it taught me, Cynthia, was that it's much better for us to stop with our assumptions and take a step back and ask better questions. And so now when my wife brings me problems, or a friend brings me problems, or I have a client who brings me problems, this is the question that I ask. And I want everyone to write this down. If you're listening, please, if you take anything, write this question down. It will change your life. Are you looking for support right now? Or are you looking for solutions? When I started, and you can use a variation of that, when I started to pause and collect myself when someone would bring me a problem, particularly my wife, and I would ask her, I'd say, babe, I appreciate you sharing all this with me. It sounds like a lot. Like, are you just needing me to hold space for you right now? Are you just needing some support? Do you just need an ear? Do you need to like process? Or are you looking for my opinion? Are you looking for my advice? Are you looking for solutions? And what I found, Cynthia, especially in marriage, bro, my wife is freaking brilliant. She already knows the answer to like every problem that she's dealing with. She doesn't need me to always fix it. Now, there are times where she'll bring something to me and she's like, I need you to help me fix this. I don't know what to do. And as a man, we're like, okay, let's go. I got it. We can fix it. But that simple question, when people bring us problems, they're navigating challenges, are you looking for support or are you looking for solutions? That will give you the information needed to know how to best help them in that moment.
Yeah, I that's actually even clarifying for me, because I sometimes make the mistake of asking that question open ended, like, what do you need? Which is not a bad question to ask, but I think when my wife is coming to me in that state, she's already overwhelmed,
Yeah.
frustrated, anxious. So she actually she doesn't want an open ended question. Like, I think giving just the two options, that's actually really brilliant. So I'm making a note of that myself. I'm going to give that a shot.
Well,
That's pretty cool,
here's a
man.
little side note for you, for anyone that is in a relationship, particularly if you're married. You know, when you're going out to eat and you're like, hey, what do you want to get to eat?
Oh,
Right? I got
jeez,
a
yeah.
solution. I got a solution for all of us.
Oh
Let's figure
yes,
this out,
lay it on
okay?
me. Okay, perfect.
So speaking of just the way that we ask questions, is that all of us experience, you're driving, you're like, hey, you want to get some food? Yeah. What do you want? What do you want to get? Well, I don't care. What do you want? Well, I don't care. What do you want? Well, why don't we go do this? No, I don't want that place. Okay, well, why don't we do that? No, I don't want that. I'm like, well, why don't you
Yeah.
decide? Well, I don't
You
know what I
just give the
want.
whole audience
Right?
PTSD.
You
Yeah.
get into this argument. And so what I learned is that, especially for just us as human beings, when we're retaining information, most often we can retain up to 3 things. Okay. And so that's why when we talk about what's the number one, soda brand on the planet, or, Coke brand on the planet, we've got Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, Sprite. People are going to only name like the top 3 that they can think of. Right. And what happens in those situations when you're with your wife is that it's information overwhelm. When we say, well, what do you want? They may not know what they want. They may not know what they need. And so if you can give options, I've found is like, well, I was thinking that we could go to, we could do Carrabba's, or we could do, Mexican food, or we could go get some sushi tonight, right? Do any of those sound appealing? Now I'm helping narrow the focus, and I'm helping get a better understanding if I'm giving options rather than just leaving, like you said, open-ended. And the other thing that I will say that's really powerful is actually, Alex Hormozy stole this one, but everyone gives him credit for it, and Chris Voss talks about this too, the would you be opposed approach. And so if I'm going out and my wife's like, I don't know where we should eat, I'm like, would you be opposed? Like, would you have a problem if we went to Olive Garden? And she's like, I wouldn't really have a problem. Okay, Olive Garden it is.
I love it. Well, and the other thing too is even if you give options and she says no to all of them,
Mm-hmm.
well, then you at least eliminated three options, and now the options you're left with are going to be, just as few. So that's really
Absolutely.
smart. Yeah, I like it, man. I like it. When you're teaching men fierce empathy, kind of this more, we'll call it a balanced approach. What's the biggest challenge you run into? Where do guys seem to be the most hung up?
Ego.
Okay, how?
We have been conditioned to believe that vulnerability is a curse word, right? And that it's weakness. That being vulnerable and transparent is it's a sign of weakness. And no man wants to feel weak. No man wants to be perceived as weak. We want to be perceived as healthy, wealthy, and wise, right? Like that's the aspirational identity of most men. I want to be healthy, I want to be wealthy, and I want to be wise. I want to be someone that is a pillar in my community. I want to be strong for my family. I want to be able to look myself in the mirror and feel great about who I am. But our ego gets in the way because we start thinking that the changes we need to make in our lives have to do with the results that we want as it pertains to our marriage or to our finances or to our health. And so what men do is they get so focused on the external affirmation, the external validation, the external like desire for themselves that we forget that what the foundation is looking at yourself with empathy first and getting vulnerable with yourself and getting transparent with yourself and coming to terms with the reality of your situation. Some people call it this, a big term people talk about nowadays is the shadow self or this dark side of who we are. I find that the men that I trust the most, that I respect the most, that I just admire are men who are acutely aware of their dark side, acutely aware of their pain and the problems and the traumas they've been through, the lessons that they've learned, the enemies that they've overcome, the mistakes that they've made, and can embrace them in a way that is through the frame of fierce empathy, creating a space for yourself to feel seen, heard, and understood and loved, to feel fully known despite all of your shame, all of your guilt, everything that you've done, to fully know yourself and to simultaneously speak the hard truth in love to yourself. And that's a brutal process because it requires us to be honest to a degree that many men haven't been. Many men aren't because we're scared and we're scared of that vulnerability. And so what I find is that the challenge when it comes to ego is this, is all of us have learned how to wear masks. All of us have learned how to front. And you see the strong guy and you see him like he's out there in public and then he gets in his car and we've all seen the videos. He just breaks down crying or he's pulling in the driveway or he's got a, my situation, I ended up with a gun to my head because I was so sick and tired of trying to be everything for everyone all the time. And my ego said that I shouldn't be this way. I should be better. I should not have these problems. I shouldn't have these addictions. I shouldn't have all this stuff. And we end up shooting all over ourselves. And what happens is our ego is so strong. It's fighting to hold on to control. And we're terrified of letting go of that control by really putting all our cards on the table and saying, okay, this is who I really am, good, bad, and ugly. Like, here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses, here are my problems, my pains, my poisons. This is my reality right now. Is this in alignment with the man that I know God created me to be? Is this in alignment with the man that I want to be? And we have a really hard time detaching from the emotions of that, how strongly we feel the guilt and the shame. But when you can detach from the emotions and just look at it objectively, and you start treating yourself the way that you would treat your best friend, your entire life starts to shift. And then all the results that you're wanting in your marriage, in the lives of your kids, in your business, in your health, those things are byproducts. Those things are byproducts of the internal change.
You strike me as a practical guy, so I have to ask, is there anything that you give people to help them get more comfortable being kind towards themselves? Because I think this is a big deal what you're hitting on. Very similar actually when people are struggling with pornography and they're asking what's the first step. We actually say well, ideally you would reach out to somebody that you trust and you would start talking to them about it.
Yeah.
But if that's too big of a jump, just start journaling. Like just start talking to yourself about it,
Yeah.
because even that is a step forward. Like
Yeah.
it's at least you getting an understanding of the inner life. So very very similar there. When you're trying to encourage people to give themselves some compassion, some empathy, what are practical ways that someone can do that?
So there's two steps that I typically recommend for men. Number one is a 30-day process with one journaling prompt. I love that you said journaling, and this is the prompt. And basically, I take them through a process saying, all right, I want you to do 2 minutes of breathing, right? Breathing exercises, anchor yourself, kind of get into a meditative state, and you're just going to journal. And what I call it is flow journaling. And at the top of the page is this one question: Father, how do you see me? And this is an extreme, ironically, to be able to detach from those emotions, we have to engage with the emotions, right? Because there's a difference between healthy detachment temporarily from an emotion and suppression. And what most men have done is suppressed emotion rather than learning to dance with it and recognizing, okay, this is something that's always going to be in the passenger seat. It's been in the driver's seat, but I need to get it into the passenger seat so I can be aware of it. I can respond to it. I can say, hey, emotions, I feel you. I sense you. I know I'm angry right now, or whatever it is, instead of the suppression. And what I've found is that when you engage in that process, it's actually very emotional, because you're going to start to hear and sense and feel things about your identity coming from the heart of the Father that you're not going to believe are true about yourself. You're going to write them down and you're like, that's BS. That's a lie. There's no way. I can't be that. But you know that those things are true, especially as believers. Like, we know what God has spoken over us. We know what our identity is. Our problem is we don't believe it. We believe enough to get saved, quote unquote, but we don't really believe who we are. And so that's step number one. Step number two is it's a 2-paper exercise. There's a left-hand paper and a right-hand paper. On the left-hand paper, what I have guys do is write down every single thing that they are dissatisfied with in their life. And I give them permission to be as petty as they want. I say, be as petty as you want to be. Write down every single thing you're dissatisfied with in your life, from your health, wealth, relationships, in your marriage, in your job, everything. Be as petty as you possibly can. Okay. That's on the left-hand sheet of paper. And this sometimes can take like 30 to 45 minutes for a guy to work through. But then on the right-hand sheet of paper, what you do is you go line by line. And on the right-hand sheet, you're going to either write one of two things. You're going to write either what you want instead. And interestingly enough, Sathya, most guys don't know what they want instead. They just know what they don't want, right? So either what you want instead or the exact opposite of whatever you wrote on the left-hand side. What this does is it creates an awareness of the gap between who you are now and the man that you want to be, the experience of life that you want to have. That middle section, the gap, is where the work is. And that's where intentionality comes to play, because if you can go line by line and say, okay, I'm really dissatisfied with my health. Well, what do you want instead? Well, I want to be healthy. Well, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean you want to be healthy? We're like, well, let's define that. It's like, well, all I know right now is that I don't want to be unhealthy. Okay, then that means we need to simply look at simplicity. What is one thing you can start doing every single day to be healthier than you've been? And I love that you talk so much about confidence, Sathya, on this podcast and just all of your message, because confidence, in my opinion, my working definition is that there's 2 degrees. You have confidence in your proficiencies, like your skills, the things that you do, like I'm good at this thing, right? And then there's self-confidence, which is that internal integrity, that foundation that you have. And for self-confidence, which is where a lot of guys struggle, to me, my working definition is that it's having a track record of undeniable proof. If you can look back and say, I am this person because just look at my track record, which is a lot of times the inverse of what addicts deal with, is like, this is who I am because just look at my track record. This is my identity now because look at my track record. They have confidence in this twisted identity. There's assurance in it. They're so confident that I'm an addict and I can't break free and all these things. The
And that's
exact
why you
opposite.
get that's why you get, sorry, the once an addict, always an addict,
Yeah.
or I'm Sathya, I'm an alcoholic. Because the identity is so deep, right?
The identity is so deep. But if we can flip that and we can start making small little changes, I tell every guy, I'm like, dude, stop aiming for 100%. Like, I know this sounds counterintuitive, but you need to temporarily lower your standards. And what I mean by that is lower your expectations for yourself, because the reason you're trapped is your expectations are, I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and do a cold plunge, and I'm going to hit the gym, and I'm going to do 4 hours of study and all these things. And we just get overwhelmed and inundated instead of saying, okay, let me step back here. Let me pause. I know that I want to be healthier, right? What is the one thing that I can do? How can I be 1% better today? Maybe increase my water intake, maybe aim for 10,000 steps, maybe, make sure I don't snooze, or go to the gym. What's the one thing that I can do? Because if you start doing that with consistency, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 7, day 30, day 90, a year, 2 years, 3 years, you'll look back, and this is the example I use. Runners run. It's very weird for someone to identify as a runner and not go running. Okay. Now, if you don't identify as a runner, it's not weird for you to not go run. It's actually weird if you do go run, because you don't identify as a runner. And what happens is that our actions lead to this track record of undeniable proof of saying, no, I can look at my life now and I can see I've been consistent in these areas. I'm confident in my abilities. I'm confident not just in my proficiencies, but I'm confident in who I am. And here's why. Relationship is what we're dealing with here on everything we're talking about here. And most often we forget that the relationship we have with ourselves is the most important relationship we will have on this earth, because you and I, each man, everyone listening here, you are the only person that you're guaranteed to spend the rest of your life with. Not your wife, not your kids. Like, as I God forbid, I hope that I go before my wife and my kids, but there's no guarantee. My wife could die, my kids could die, like, things could happen. I am the only person I'm guaranteed to spend the rest of my life with. And so that relationship with myself, for most men, what has happened is because we say we're going to do things and we fail to do them, we consistently break trust within ourselves. Now, we're great at keeping our word to everybody else. We love being called a man of integrity. That's a big thing for a man, especially Christian men. I'm a man of integrity. And that's because everybody can rely on you. The question is, can you rely on yourself? Because if you've consistently made promises to yourself, I'm going to make this change. I'm not going to snooze anymore. I'm going to stop alcohol. I'm going to stop looking at porn. I'm going to stop doing whatever these things. I'm going to make these changes. If you consistently don't do that, you're fracturing trust. You're fracturing respect, and you're destroying your self-confidence. In the same way, Cynthia, if you and I have a relationship and I constantly say, I'm going to do this, brother, and then I don't do it, over time, you're going to stop trusting me. You're going to lose respect for me. And then there's going to be no confidence in our relationship. This is what men, we do internally to ourselves, because we are consistently breaking trust, because we say we're going to do something. We don't. We don't keep our word to ourselves. And if you have no trust, you have no respect, you have no confidence, you don't actually have the foundation of integrity that you want so desperately. And just like a building, the integrity of a building, if that's shaky, your entire world can crumble in an instant.
How does a guy know when he's just saying he's going to do something because he's excited? It's sort of the heat of the moment. It's like the classic like conference high,
Mm-hmm.
And you go to this conference, whether it's business or faith or whatever, and you come back and you're like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to wake up 30 minutes early, cold plunge, infrared sauna, or spend 30 minutes in the Bible, or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you know when it's like, okay, maybe I'm just in the heat of the moment, maybe this is just impulsive, versus I'm making something that I can actually commit to? Because I think, like, obviously I just drew a pretty strong line. Like, we know sometimes we come out of these highly emotional moments and we know some of the things we're saying we're going to do actually may not be realistic because we're not thinking this stuff through all the way.
Right.
But at the same time, if I think about a lot of the habits in my life that have sustained me, most of them did come out of these moments of pain where I was like, forget this. Like, I'm sick and tired of this. Like, there was a very strong emotional component. How do you know as a guy when it's like, okay, maybe I need to scale that back, or maybe I need to sit on this for a little bit before I make this promise to myself? Because I think what you're saying is a really big deal. I don't know if people understand how much our self-confidence is attached to these little conversations and little promises that happen in our head. Yeah. And I just want to make sure the audience doesn't get too gun shy to do them at all. Yeah. And the fear of like, oh, I don't know if I can follow through on that either. How do you strike that balance?
Well, the first thing I would say, and you know this, is that all of us are 90%, like this is statistical evidence for success in any area. We're 90% more likely to do what we say we're going to do when we commit to someone else, which means if you're a guy listening right now and you are dealing with porn and you're dealing with some of this identity stuff, you're dealing with confidence and you want to get this out of your life, if you talk with Sathya and say, brother, I want to join your program, I want to be a part of this, you are 90% more likely to actually accomplish what you want to accomplish. And
Right.
that's in any single area. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I guess the key is that you're telling somebody that means that it has to mean something to you, I'm guessing, right? Because I remember when I was working, this was before I quit and started doing this full time.
Mm-hmm.
We had a boss, an amazing boss. I mean, he was one of the best people I worked for, if not the best. But I remember he made this New Year's resolution to lose a bunch of weight, and he said it at a staff meeting. This is a staff of, I guess we were maybe 35 people, and he talked about that. And he said, he made this comment like, my goal is to lose 50 pounds in the next whatever, and he made this comment like, how's that for accountability, telling all you guys? And in my head, I kind of thought, I don't know if that's actually accountability, because you're kind of just like throwing it out there. It's sort of like the illusion of accountability because I'm telling people, but I think what you're talking about is something different, right?
It is different. It is very different because invited, like we use this word accountability a lot. And unfortunately, it's been really blasted all over the internet and the media to mean this negative thing, right? Because usually we're using it in a frame of like, they need to be held accountable. This dirtbag leader did such and such, and we need to hold people accountable. And so there's been like this twisting of what I believe the word was originally intended to mean. Like if we think about what accountable stands for, if we just think accounting, we just use like the beginning of that word. To bring an account of something, or accounting has to do with making sure that the scales are balanced, that the checkbook is balanced, that our accounts are balanced, right? That if we're making withdrawals and we're making deposits, that everything adds up, right? We should get a zero at the end, meaning that like everything's been accounted for, right? And so when it comes to accountability, the difference that you're talking about is that if I truly want accountability, I would come to you, Sathya, and I'd say, brother, I've been dealing with these things, and this is not what I want in my life anymore. And I'm giving you permission to ask the uncomfortable questions and to not give me a pass and to look me in the face and remind me of who I really am. And when I fail, to be there to, sometimes I might need a shoulder, I might need to cry, I might need to pick me up, but then you're going to turn right back around and kick me in the butt and say, look, dude, let's get back in gear because this is who you are. And you told me this is your standard. You said this is your standard and you are falling beneath that. And I care about you too much. I care about your future, your family, your kids too much. You asked for this. I am holding you accountable. That is a very different dynamic.
Let's go. That's it though. I think that's what we're all missing, especially I think you and I are about the same age. I'm 34.
Same
and
age.
I think
Exactly.
yeah, okay. I thought so, yeah. And I think, at this stage of life in particular, I'm really feeling the void of that. And I would say not the void of it because I do have it. I'm feeling the level of intentionality that's required to have it at this stage of my life. It's not built in. It's not the same way as when you're studying or even early on in like a career, that kind of thing. I just feel like people are more naturally to like come around you. And our social dynamics have changed a bit. We've moved cities and moved churches and there's some other things, but I think what you're saying is really important. The other thing, we talked about vulnerability earlier, and I personally have been really drifting away from that word just because I feel that it's getting diluted and people are using it as like marketing strategies and, like attention grabs and all that, even though I love what it stands for. I prefer transparency. But I think the thing you just hit on is really, it's sort of what we're talking about here. Your actual motives for, when you do reach out to someone, and ask for accountability, or when you are finding these places to be vulnerable, your motives really have to be pure because people can really, this can be really distorted. Like I said, like I know people who are vulnerable online to get the likes and the follows and to go viral, but they're not really sincere, or people who are, like I said, like we'll say like, how's this for being accountable? Like I could say, here's my big goal on my podcast to, the thousands of listeners we have, but that's not really accountability. That's not actual accountability. Because like you said, they're not going to come back and ask me the hard questions. How, I mean, I have to imagine you kind of self-select because your messaging is so strong. By the time people come to you, they probably have the right motives in place. But is there any, are you doing any of that kind of motive checking, or even with guys who maybe are fact checking themselves? How do you make sure you're doing these right things for the right reasons?
Let me see if I understand your question. How do I make sure we're doing the right things for the right reasons? Are you saying, again, just in the context of like the motive behind being vulnerable and the motive for asking for accountability?
Yeah.
It's a really good question. And I would say that the hardest thing in the world is to know someone else's intention. We all like to think we know everyone's intentions, right? And this is where, if we go back to our earlier conversation, Cynthia, is that why we have to be intimately familiar with ourselves. Why you have to know that shadow side of you, that dark side of you, why you have to be intimately familiar with your vices, with your weaknesses, with your strengths, with what you're good at, with what you're not good at. And that is where we can open up a dialogue with another human being and actually have those conversations. I'm reading a book called UOU by E.T., the hip hop preacher. Anybody know Eric Thomas? Absolutely love Eric Thomas. He just came out with a new book recently, and he's talking about that in that book. He said that one of the things that has been instrumental to his success is his business partner, CJ. Now, CJ is nothing like him at all. But the reason that the relationship works so well is that ET had familiarized himself with his tendencies, his strengths, his superpowers, and with his weaknesses. So he was able to come to his business partner, and this doesn't have to be your business partner. It can be accountability partner, it can be your coach, it can be a mentor, and say, hey, these are the things that I want to do. These are the things I want to accomplish. These are the goals. This is what I want to change. But I also need to tell you about my dark side. I need to tell you that there's probably going to be times that you're going to ask to hold me accountable, and I'm probably going to lie straight to your face because my ego's flaring up, right? Yeah. I've been doing it, right? There's probably going to be these times where I'm going to try and victim, like blame, situations, or like I'm going to operate in a victim modality. And so I think that with these, it's really predicated on the coach or the mentor, the accountability partner, knowing how to ask better questions, which is what we talked about earlier. It's like, okay, so if I'm going to hold you accountable to this, what happens if you don't do it? I've never really thought about that. Okay, what's the consequence going to be? Because if you don't feel anything, and so a lot of times, especially in higher level, like consulting clients that we do combination like coaching and consulting, I'll give them a consequence that I don't give it to them. I'm sorry. We work through and say, okay, I'm going to hold you accountable to this, but if you don't, what is the consequence? What's the repercussion? They're like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, what's your favorite charity? They're like, so-and-so. It's like, all right, you don't hit this goal, you write $1,000 check to that charity. Does that sound like a good deal? They're like, oh, snap. And their shoulders go back. They stand a little taller, and they're like, wow, now something's on the line. Something's on the line. And so I try and do it in ways that aren't just driven to like for the business to make more money. I'm trying to do it so that the clients get the results. And if that means looking outside and thinking outside the box, is saying, okay, if you don't accomplish this, what's going to happen? Like, what's the cost? That changes things, because then it allows for more vulnerability or transparency, if you will, because now it's like we're working together as a team. It's not me trying to call you out. It's not me trying to, like, I use the term, my job is to call people up, not to my standards, not to the standards I think that they should have, to the standards that they've communicated to me are their standards. Because I'm not trying to make more versions of David Waldy. The world couldn't handle it, number one, right? And number two, my job as a coach, as a consultant, and I know this is your job too, is not to make versions of ourselves. It's to make people the best version of themselves that they can be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're selling yourself short, man. I could use another David Waldy or two in my life. I think you're good people. But I hear what you're saying. Let me ask you, when you use that language, helping people become the best version of themselves, I think that kind of language is going to become really important for us in the days ahead, because I think people are starting to embrace this sort of individuality in desires and goals and composition and all that.
Yeah.
But I am curious, you've coached a lot of people over the years, and you have a very diverse client base, if I can say that. You're not like super niche down,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really cool. Are there any commonalities you've observed in people who do seem to really accept the accountability? They take the action steps. Like, are there any? I guess I'm listing commonalities, but I think what I'm asking more is like, is there anything in their character, anything in the values? Is there anything specific that people are really after when they say, "I want to be the best version of myself"?
Absolutely. Yeah. The ones that I emotionally resonate with the most and that we just naturally are attracted and find each other, the commonalities are at their core. They're what I call a go-giver. For those that have read the book by Bob
I
Berg,
just heard about that book for the first time like this
oh my
week.
gosh, Cynthia, please do yourself a favor. I read that book at least once a year. Like, and I've read it
Really?
for probably the last decade. Yeah, it is
Wow.
absolutely incredible. It's a parable and it's written in a really cool way that teaches these principles of success, but I like the parable aspect. And so a go giver is not the opposite of a go getter. Okay. A go giver is someone that is a go getter, but they understand that the reason that they're going and getting and accomplishing and doing these things is so that they can be of greater service to humanity, because their job and their goal is to make the world a better place, to impact their family, their community, their neighborhood. So what I find are the commonalities of those that are seriously committed to the process is that they have a deep why that is bigger than themselves. And we've all heard that terminology, especially like Simon Sinek brought that into the forefront, like, discover, what is it? Now discover your why, or I remember,
Start
forget the
with
name of it.
why. Start
Start
with
with
why.
why, right?
Yeah.
And that's become a huge thing that I think has risen to the top, which is important, but I think it's very abstract to a lot of people. They're like, well, I don't really know why, like I'm supposed to be doing anything. And what I tell people is this, is that purpose, like my working definition of purpose, is nothing more than an action to be taken to create a specific result. So purpose is nothing more than an action to be taken to create a specific result. So the purpose of taking a shower is to get clean. The purpose of driving a car is to get where you want to go. The purpose of eating food is to nourish your body. And so every action that we're taking, it's because we want a specific outcome. The problem is most of us aren't aware, consciously aware of the outcomes that we really want. They're all abstract. It's like, oh, I want $1 million and I want the trophy wife and I want a Lamborghini and I want this. And they don't understand that behind every surface desire that we have is an emotional one. It's an emotional desire that we have because we're wanting to feel something that we don't currently feel. So why do people want what they want? It's because they want to feel a certain way. And when you can dig into understanding that core desire, that core reason behind their external desire, you can start to help people understand why they're doing what they're doing. And what's beautiful in this, Cynthia, is that you can help people see why they're doing what they're doing. And immediately their life is infused with more purpose, with more meaning. And they start to realize, whoa, 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 whoa. You're telling me I don't need that in order to feel this way? I don't need to accomplish and achieve and do this in order to have these feelings in the present moment. And it shifts the entire dynamic because these commonalities, again, that you're asking about, I found they're people that are driven, they're ambitious, they have a vision, they want to impact lives, they want to serve people well, they want to leave a legacy for their family, they want to make money without taking advantage of people, they want to set, examples for what it looks like to be great human beings, but they're also at the same time, Cynthia, they're also, so many of them deal with imposter syndrome. So many of them deal with this fear of being perceived a certain way, a fear of being misunderstood. They have a hard time stepping into their confidence because the last thing they would ever want is for someone to label them as arrogant. And so there's a lot of fear that comes with this of leaning into the purpose and the meaning and creating a life that you truly love. But I find that the commonalities are all like they want to be better human beings for the world, and we just need to figure out how to strip away all the stuff that's unnecessary so they can start living with purpose, in purpose, on purpose, by a purpose. And before you know it, you start doing that and your whole life is infused with meaning, and that's
That's
where the
so
passion
interesting.
comes from.
So if I'm hearing you right, it's almost like if all somebody can articulate is the superficial cookie cutter kind of
Mm-hmm.
desires, the Lambo, the $1 million, the
Yep.
trophy wife, those can actually be clues or things that you can kind of pull on to be like, well, what does that mean to you? Like it can the superficial desires can reveal the emotional desires,
Yes.
and once you can articulate the emotional desire, you might actually find out that yeah, you might want a more superficial desire, but you can at least articulate it in a way that's more personal to you instead of just the stereotypical $1 million.
Absolutely. And so there's an exercise, and you might have heard of it before. There's a lot of different terms for it, but it's called 7 layers or 7 levels deep. There's like 7 questions. Is basically what you can take someone through is a process of asking them why. So if someone says like, I want a Lamborghini, awesome, sweet, let's get you a Lamborghini. Well, but before we do that, why? Why do you want a Lambo? Right? And then you take them through this process. They're going to give you an answer, and then you ask them why to whatever the response is, right? Like, well, I want a Lambo because I feel like it would be like super sick to drive around town, and like, and I'm like, cool. Why is it important to you for you to look super sick driving around town, like get people's attention? Why is that important to you? And you dig and dig and dig and dig and dig until you get down to the heart. Answers shift from the head to the heart, and when you can hit the heart, man, then you can help people formulate a plan that leads to what I call, like this term we use, I think it's overused now, is actual alignment. Because actual alignment comes down to having a definition of the man that you want to become. And most guys don't know that. Most guys don't know who they want to become. They know what they want to do. They know what they want to achieve. They know what they want to have. They know what they want to own. They don't know who they want to be. And when you shift this entire thing on its head, when you stop asking, what do I need to do to make more money? What do I need to do to fix my marriage? What do I need to do to fix my health? What do I need to do? What do I need to do? And you start asking, who do I need to become? What you need to do gets crystal clear really, really fast.
Interesting. Huh. That's really cool. So they find out, so in this yeah, the 7 layers deep, we do that as well. We kind of do it in different contexts. You discover who you want to be, and in that, then the action plan becomes a lot easier, like what you need to do, what the strategies and tactics look like, all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. The why starts to become clearer and clearer. And so when you can anchor into why you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, it's the driving, motivating force. Why you talk about people that are self-starters and self-motivators is because they have a purpose. They have a plan. They have a why. And so it's easy for them to get out of bed. If you don't have that in your life, it's really freaking hard to get out of bed every single day. And it leads men, especially led me to an incredibly dark place where I wanted to end my life.
Tell me more about that. What happened and how'd you get out of it?
So I had worked incredibly hard my entire like younger years in school. I graduated high school with a full ride academic scholarship. I did everything everyone said you're supposed to do in order to set yourself up for success. And I decided to turn it down. And instead I joined this leadership intensive and internship program because I wanted to learn more about my strengths, who I was. I basically took like kind of a gap year, if you will. And through that process, I had grown up in a very tumultuous situation in the sense of my parents separated and then they got divorced. There's a lot of pain that came from out of my background. I learned how to wear masks from an early age, and it's all throughout middle school and high school. It's like chorus and drama and sports and the clubs and like everything I could be involved in. I just threw myself into performance-based everything because I wanted to achieve, I wanted recognition, I wanted validation, and I've always looked externally for the affirmation of other people. Like if they affirm me, I'm okay, right? Because I never felt okay by myself. And so what that did is it put me on the fast track to what everyone says you're supposed to do is to, get the degree and graduate and get a good job, except something inside of me was like, nah, I can't do this. Like there's no reason for me to go get a 4-year degree when I don't know why. There's no purpose to it other than get a 4-year degree and have to take out student loans if I needed to or whatever. And even with a full ride scholarship, I knew I was going to have to come up with money, and I didn't have a reason. I was like, what's the reason? And so what did I do? I threw myself into the workforce. And by the time I was 25, I had achieved everything that everyone says you're supposed to achieve in order to be successful in the United States of America. Glass corner office, company car, 6-figure salary, married, house, kid. Like I made it. I won. And I was about 60 pounds heavier than I am right now. I was working 70 to 80 hours a week. I was constantly dealing with panic attacks, suicidal ideation, depression. I hated who I was. Everyone on the outside, though, this is the thing, Cynthia, about the ego. Everyone on the outside was like, dude, David's winning. Like he's crushing it. Like, dude, and like I remember so often people would come to me and be like, man, like, what are you doing? Like, can you give me advice and stuff? And I'm like, 25 years old. You don't know much. Like, no offense to any younger guys, right? Like, you're going to learn a lot as you get into your 30s, right? And what happened was that I realized that I had achieved the American corporatized version of success, but I had lost myself in the process. And I came to this point where I was disgusted with who I hated the man. I was addicted to porn. I was dealing with nicotine and alcohol. I was, I'd done drugs. I like, there are seasons of my life where I just made really stupid decisions. And it was all in this desperate attempt to try and feel good enough, to feel worthy, to feel loved, to feel useful. And it led me to this place where I found myself in the bathroom. It was a Sunday afternoon. My wife and my daughter were actually at church, and I pulled out my Glock and I put it to my head and I said, I'm done. Because I convinced myself that the world would be a better place if I wasn't here, and the life insurance money would be better for my wife and for my daughter. And in that moment, it was a divine interruption. I've never heard the audible voice of God, but on that day, I felt it in my bones. And what he said to me, it was not comfortable. It wasn't this. He said, David, I love you. I'm with you and I am for you. But I can't fix this for you. And then he paused. And Sathia, to hear that, my entire life, I had been convinced and prayed desperately, Jesus, fix it, please. Take this away. Help. Like, I've been in church my whole life, man. Like, I know the phrases that we use. I know the churchese and the Christianese that we use. And what I realized for me, Sathia, was that I had put all of the responsibility for my life, all of it, into God's hands. And that sounds noble. That sounds great. Yeah, give your life over to God. I had given it over to God and completely put my hands up in surrender, meaning all of the responsibility was on him and none was on me. I was not taking responsibility for my actions, my choices, how I was using my brain, how I was using my body, how I was using my heart. It was all in God's divine will. The reason that I was overweight, the reason that I was dealing with anxiety, this must be God's plan. This must be part of what God has for me. This must be God's will for my life. And it was in that moment where he said, but I can't fix this for you. Immediately after, he said, you get to decide. You get to commit. You get to become. And it was a wake-up moment for me. I wish I could say that the next couple of years things got easier. They didn't, because what I'd realized is that I had walked headfirst into hell. And there's no like, just turn left and get out. I had to turn back around and walk out through all of that pain, all of that misery, all of the addiction, all of the difficulty, all the anxiety, all of the depression. And the only way that I found, the most effective way, I should say, it's not the only way, is that I had enough awareness to say, I have to surround myself with mentors and with coaches and people who inspire me, who encourage me, who challenge me, and will help me live up to a higher standard, because I don't know what to do right now. All I know is that I don't want this life anymore. I don't know who I want to become. I don't know what I want in life. I just don't want to live this way anymore. And that set me in motion a process where my entire life started to change. And it was very, very hard. But now I reflect back on it, and I'm so grateful for many aspects of it, because it's enabled me to learn how to more empathetically interact, particularly with men that are going through that kind of stuff, and how to have that fierce component, which is what I needed. I needed someone to look me in the face and say, David, that is not who you are. You've forgotten who you are. You are a son of the King. And here's the truth.
Yeah. Dang. Thanks for sharing, man. That's really powerful. How long ago was that? You said you were 25?
So 25 was when I achieved all those things. It wasn't until I was 28 when that happened. So it was 3 years later of me my wife and I went through a miscarriage. I had dealt with, like, almost wrecked driving down the interstate, having an anxiety attack. I had been told by the owners of our company that, mind you, I was making millions and millions and millions of dollars for them. I was a top sales producer in a $400 million a year company. They pulled me in and said, the only reason that you're still here is because you're too much of a financial asset. We would fire you and your entire team if we could. And the whole reason is because I had found out some things going on behind the scenes that were unethical and wrong, and I came out about them. And so it was a lot of pain, man. It was a lot of pain that finally got me to this point where I was like, that phrase we all know, if nothing changes, nothing changes. I had to start making systematic changes that took a very long time, but my gosh, I don't even recognize that man anymore. I love him now. I have compassion and empathy towards him, and I'm grateful for him, but I don't recognize him anymore.
Man, what an amazing story. So, if you were talking somebody else through, suicidality, maybe their entire life or their career, finances, marriage, something that is like on the brink of death, and
Mhm.
you need to talk them back out of hell, like you're saying, is there one thing that you would really try to get across? Is there one skill you'd want them to build, one book you'd want them to read, one thing you'd want them to internalize? What would be the one thing you try to get across?
What you believe determines the entire experience of your life. And if what you believe isn't useful, you need to learn how to change it. This is very controversial, especially in Christianity and for even I would say any religion, faith orientation, is because I'm not saying that we need to challenge our beliefs about God and things like that, but I am saying that we need to challenge the beliefs that were conditioned and programmed into us instead of formulating beliefs based on our own relationship and our interaction with the Word of God, with the Bible, and understanding and developing that. For me, it wasn't just about my faith. It was my beliefs about who I was, about what was possible, about my identity. And if you can learn how to shift your beliefs, your experience and how you feel about life will change, because our beliefs lead to what we think about. And what we think about leads to what we feel. And what we feel leads to what we do. And what we do reinforces our beliefs. It's a cycle. And so if you can disrupt the cycle, disrupt the pattern, and start to really question the one book you asked for, I have to give you two. The first one is called Loving What Is by Byron Katie. And it is 4 questions that'll change your life. And they are 4 questions that changed my life forever. The second one is a book that has kind of a misleading name, but hands down, I'd say it's probably my top 3. And I love to read. I've I've been an addict of nonfiction for a very long time. It's called The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. Now, the challenge with this book is that most people will just read it and think it's a great book instead of doing what it actually says. And in the book, there are instructions that once you read through it one time, there are 10 chapters that are 10 scrolls. And for 30 days, you read scroll number 1, morning, noon, and evening. It takes about 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the... What I didn't realize, and I trusted my coach at the time, was how significant of an impact it would have on my actual wiring. And so I got really nerdy learning about neuroscience and neuroplasticity and behavioral psychology and emotional intelligence, all these things, trying to understand how, like, why do we believe what we believe? How do we change it? And how do we bring it into alignment with something that's more useful for who we want to be? And that book, if you commit to the process, will help you completely shift your paradigm and your perspective on life.
So, one thing we've been talking about on our platforms a lot lately is the importance of finding people that you are willing to trust beyond your own understanding.
Hmm.
That to me, like, that's a good coach, right? Because I think if you are going to question your coach when they tell you to do something that you don't get, then they're not going to be able to get you to that place of breakthrough. Like, you have to be willing to trust beyond your understanding.
Yeah.
And the one thing I just want to highlight in you, David, that I see is like you really foster a lot of trust, just high integrity. You clearly care about people. Amazing story. And I just want to say to my audience, I don't always do this with our guests, but if you really do feel like a connection here, or you can tell there's something on David and you trust him, really go check his stuff out. I think especially if you're a business owner or you're a man, you're looking to grow, improve in a specific area of life or all areas of life. This is a really worthy cause, and this is a guy who will lead you into good places, even when you don't understand it. If people do want to find out a little bit more about you, David, and they want to take some action on that, what's the best way for them to do it?
Yeah. So at the risk of sounding pretentious, I hate saying it this way. You can Google me. you can just Google me, and you can find my website. You can find access to The Ardent Man. So theardentman.com. I've got free resources. I'm all over social media. Interestingly enough, I post different types of content on different platforms. So I'm not one of those like copy paste kind of guys. So my TikTok content is going to be very different than my Instagram, and it's different than Facebook. And so whichever platform, for anyone listening listening, there's your jam, come hang. I would love to connect. And man, thank you for your kind words, Cynthia. I really appreciate that, brother, for real.
It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, man.